Welcome to this episode of Conversations. My guest today is Roy Justice, who's a singing historian, lives in Chambersburg. He's a Mansfield University graduate, and has a really unique style of combining storytelling, history, and music to give us a good perspective of not only where the music came from, but in the context of the story of our country. Welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis.
And the theme of this show is Christmas traditions in America.
Right.
And you're going to start out with a song I probably have heard, but the title doesn't sound familiar. The Boar's Head Carol?
Yeah, the Boar's Head Carol is one of the oldest carols that we still sing today. Carols were known as round dances or ring dances, and they were made up at times when the religious community frowned upon people dancing to music. But children, with all of their pent-up energy, would very often need to find some way to expel that energy. And what they did was they came up with play party songs or party songs that they called them, and some of them were these round dances or ring dances. People may be familiar with maypole dances and things like that. There's some places still practiced here in the United States and over in Europe. But the carols could be about any subject. For a carol to be a Christmas carol, some people would define it as it could only be about the manger scene and nothing else. If it's about anything else, it's not a Christmas carol. But people don't make that much of a distinction anymore. Mm-hmm. The Boar's Head Carol is, like I said, one of the oldest ones that we still sing today. And there is a story behind it. The Boar's Head is a tradition that is still being presented over at the Queen's College in Oxford, England. Most people know that as Oxford University. And they have been celebrating the festival of the Boar's Head ever since the 13 and 1400s. But an incident took place at Oxford University that made this particular tradition something special. There was a young man who had gone out into the woods surrounding the college. He wanted to study his Latin, and Christmas time preparations at that time sometimes took weeks ahead of time, and it was too noisy in the hall. He decided to go out into the woods and start studying, and the story goes that he was attacked by a very large wild boar. Now, there were estimates that this boar was anywhere from 400 to 600 pounds in its size, and unlikely that it was close to 600, possibly 400. And if nobody has ever seen a wild boar before, picture a very large pink pig that could stretch as wide as my arms are stretching, if the camera can pick that up, from snout to tail, and standing nearly chest height on me when I'm standing up. Cover that pink pig all over with black oily fur, and for the male, out of its lower jaw will come two very razor-sharp tusks, very long and sharp, that they will use to gore their victims. The females have tusks, but they will bite rather than gore. Now, the fact that this young man was out in the woods and was attacked by a wild boar of that size, you would assume that the young man perished, but he didn't. The question is, how did he survive? Because he killed the boar. The question is, how did he kill the boar?
Yeah.
Had no weapons with him, only his book of Latin. And it could be that he was attacked by a female, a sow, because a female will open their jaw to attack, to bite, whereas a male will lower their head and lift up to get the tusks underneath to kind of rip you to pieces. We're assuming that it was a sow, but we're not exactly sure, because what he did was to protect himself, and whether he was on the ground or sitting or standing, he took the book and shoved it into the boar's mouth, which if it was a male, the mouth was probably closed, but a female would have her mouth open, and the boar choked to death and died. He went back to the hall and told his friends what happened, and of course their reaction was, yeah, right, tell us another one. Yeah. But he said, look, just humor me, come out, and sure enough, they find the several hundred-pound boar. They bring it back to the hall, and although wild boar was a delicacy that they normally consumed from the snout to the tail. In most instances, this was one of the instances where they cut off the boar's head, put it on a special platter, a silver platter, decorated it with greens, and while the boar was roasting for the feast they were going to have, they wrote the song, The Boar's Head Carol. And they gave the boar's head on a tray to the young man to carry in to the meal. Now, the way they served their meals were they were done in courses, and in between each course, the singers would come out and sing and entertain the group, and then the table would be cleared for the next course. These became known as madrigal dinners. And at Christmas time, this was the boar's head feast. And when I was at Mansfield University as a freshman, I had the privilege of being a member of the concert choir and of the madrigal group that put on fundraising dinners every Christmas for the group. And we did one of these madrigal dinners, and my director at that time, it was David Dick, he said, "Roy, I want you to carry the boar's head. And your job is to sing the first verse of the Boar's Head Carol while you're moving around the tables, and then when we get done with the song, you put the tray down, and that symbolizes the beginning of the evening." And I said, "Sure, no problem." And then the day that it happened, we actually were able to get a real boar's head on a silver platter from a local boar farm that is no longer open at this point. I think it was up towards Elmira, and they have since closed. But at least for 2 years, we were able to get a boar's head for this. And the night that I did it the first time, the director said, "Oh yes, by the way, I forgot to tell you something. You carry it over your head." Now this thing weighed about 30 pounds. And we were dressed in costume, medieval style costumes, and it was warm in there because they were preparing this feast. And by the time I got finished, I was drenched in sweat, and my arms were shaking and could barely put them down. But I sang the Boar's Head Carol, and that was my introduction to it. So I'm going to sing just a little of it to give you an idea what it's about. There are some Latin phrases that are in here. When you hear "quod estes in convivio," it means "as there are many at the feast." And "caput apri defero," which means "the boar's head I offer." "Redens laudes Domino," giving praises to the Lord, basically for sparing this young man's life. So, the boar's head in hand bear I, bedecked with bays and rosemary, and I pray you, my masters, be merry, quod estes in convivio. Caput apri defero, redens laudes Domino. The boar's head, as I understand, is the rarest dish in all the land, which thus bedecked with a gay garland, let us servire cantico. Caput apri defero, redens laudes Domino. And then the tray goes down, and the feast begins. And that is one of the older Christmas traditions that still goes on today, like I said, over in England. And there are places in the United States that still have the Boar's Head feast. But those boar's heads are getting harder and harder to come by.
Yeah.
We actually had gotten one year from the Boar's Head Meat Company when we found out we couldn't get the boar's head from the farm that was fairly local. And then after that, people were reserving them so far in advance, we didn't get a chance to get them at that point.
It was neat that you had the experience.
Yes, it was
doing that.
Something I will never forget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Deck the halls.
Like I said, the preparation for Christmas took place for weeks at a time. And while this young man was studying his Latin, of course, there were lots going on. Many different preparations were made, especially decorating the halls, and they would actually sing a lot of songs. One song that was written specifically for that purpose was "Deck the Halls." And again, the lyrics in the songs really give you a clear idea of what it is that they're doing if you know what to look for, what these things mean. I'm going to sing the two verses that are most commonly done, and I want you, in particular, Dennis, to pay attention to the first line of the second verse, because I will ask you a question about that. So if you know it, sing along. I'm not going to force you to do it. I'm putting Dennis on the spot because he's my audience today. Mark, our great engineer, is in the booth, so he can't be a part of this. But if you're at home and you want to sing along with this, by all means do so. Deck the halls with boughs of holly, fa la 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 la. 'Tis the season to be jolly, fa la 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 la. Don we now our gay apparel, fa la 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 la. Troll the ancient Yuletide carol, fa la 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 la. See the blazing Yule before us, fa la 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 la. Strike the harp and join the chorus, fa la 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 la. Follow me in merry measure, fa la 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 la. While I tell of Yuletide treasure, fa la 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 la. So that's Deck the Halls, and this would be a song that would be commonly done when people were caroling or working. In fact, caroling is a tradition that goes way back to the point where a lot of religious communities banned the practice of the celebration of Christmas as a religious holiday because they thought Christmas was more of a solemn time. In fact, it was Cornwallis between 1640 and 1660, he and Parliament got together and banned Christmas celebrations. So in an effort to keep these songs alive, people then took them outside and caroled through the streets, sometimes going house to house. And the groups would then sing, and in some cases they would wait to be given something. And we'll talk about that at the very end of the program too, about this tradition of caroling and where it came from, if we have enough time. But in this song, Deck the Halls, what are they decking the halls or decorating the halls with?
Boughs of holly.
Boughs of holly. Holly was a green, and what most people don't know is that holly comes in a couple of different varieties, but two different species, male and female. Holly bushes either have red berries on them or they don't. And Dennis, do you know the difference, which is male and which is female?
I think the berries are male.
Good guess, but it's the opposite. And this is what most people think, because in nature, in the animal kingdom, the male species gets all the coloration and all the decoration, but in the plant kingdom, it is the female. So the female has the red berries. The ones that don't have the red berries are the male plants. Now, the boys will gather up both kinds, and they will bring the female plant, the red berry plant, inside the hall for the girls to decorate with, and they will take the male holly plant stems outside to do something that the girls are not allowed to participate in. The girls are indoors decorating the mantelplaces, the tables, the windowsills with these very beautiful holly branches, while the boys are outside taking the male holly branches that don't have the red berries and doing something with them that is too technical for the women to deal with. Do you have a clue as to what it might be?
I do not.
All right. They are boiling pots of water where they will now take the holly leaves off of the branches and throw the holly leaves into the boiling water. And they're waiting for something to happen. What do you think is going to happen? Oh, let me ask you this, Dennis. Have you ever seen holly plants?
Yes.
Okay. We don't have one here. I should have thought about that to demonstrate. But if you look at a holly branch, the leaves are dark green and shiny on the top, and when you turn it over, it's a very dull green, a light green on the bottom. That top of the leaf is covered in wax that amplifies sunlight to heat up the leaf for the existence of the chlorophyll in the leaf. Underneath, the warmth from the leaf comes from the ground below it. But when the upper part of the leaf is facing up into the air, it can freeze. So the wax is there to insulate it. Now that you know that there's a waxy coating on the top of the leaf, what do you think those leaves are going into the hot pot to do?
Boil the wax from
Boil the wax, melt the wax off, and when the wax floats to the top of the pot, the boys skim off the wax, and while it's still warm, they form it into candles with their hands. And then they take the candles into the hall later on, and when they're lit, they smell like holly plants. The whole place has this beautiful smell. Now, a lot of people think, well, holly doesn't smell. Yes, it does, but in the wintertime, when most people even pay attention to it, they don't. Their noses close down, the olfactory sense closes down because the skin is so sensitive and you can't smell as well in the wintertime. Otherwise, you would probably smell the odor of the plant. So this is one of the things that they're doing when they're decorating. Then we come to the second verse where it says, "See the blazing Yule before us." What is a Yule?
A log.
It is the Yule log, the traditional Christmas feast log that is put into the fireplace. And today we can still buy those Yule logs. They're decorated with sparkles and chemicals so that when they burn, they have multicolored flames and things. Well, the fireplaces that we have now are very, very tiny compared to the fireplaces that these folks used to have, a couple of hundred years ago. They were large enough for people to actually stand in, and you could have 4 or 5 different kinds of fires going at the same time to cook different foods for different lengths of time.
I didn't know that.
So what they did at Christmas time was, if you were fortunate enough to be able to hire a servant, or you had servants, you told the servants to go out and find the biggest Yule log that they could find. These Yule logs were meant to burn for 2 or 3 days. So it was a large log. And what they did was they cleaned out the fireplace because they had made all of their food ahead of time, prepared everything. Now they were going to bring this Yule log into this big fireplace to burn, that would signify the beginning of the Christmas feast, which would take place over a couple of days rather than just one big meal. And so they started to design their houses in a special way to accommodate this one tradition. And if you go to England, parts of Germany, some parts of Italy, you'll see some of the old thatched roof houses that still exist will have not only a front door, but a door on the side of the house and a door on the other side of the house. These days, most of the time, they're sealed up. But in those days, they kept those doors viable for one reason. You couldn't drag a log this big into the house yourself. You had to pull it into the house using a horse. The horse couldn't go straight in the front door and have enough room to drag the log in, drop it off in the fireplace, turn around and come back out. So the horse entered one side of the house through one door, came through the middle of the house, they rolled the log into the fireplace, and then the horse went out the other side. That was the only reason they had those 2 doors on either side of the house. But then once the servants were told to get the biggest log they could, and they wanted to, for one reason. Once that log was lit and the Christmas feast began, the servants were on vacation for the entire time the log burned. And they didn't have to come back and clean out the fireplace and set things up until the log was completely burned out. And so they wanted to find the biggest log that they could. So that's a little bit about Deck the Halls.
You are the only person I know who can sing a song, and by the time you're done, I've learned about history, music, sociology, ecology, biology.
Well, and Dennis, it's interesting that you say that, because that's what I found out. In American history in particular, you have to go back if you go back before 1900, if you were living at that time, you had to know all of these things. You had to be aware of this or you didn't survive. Whereas after 1900, with all the new inventions that were coming through and technology growing, especially after the 1930s and absolutely after the 1950s, these days you can be born in your house, educated in your house, you could live in your house and never leave your house and live your entire life. And everything can be brought to you, taken care of. You don't have to do a thing. I mean, it's a little extreme to say that. But there was a time when that was not true. And you had to know all of these different things in order to just know what life was all about. Otherwise, you were going to pay the price somewhere along the line. But I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, Roy, a little bit about the next song. Pronounced Stille Nacht.
It's German, and it's Stille Nacht.
Stille Nacht.
Otherwise known as Silent Night. This was one of those hymns that has a legacy that history has proven questionable. The original story is that in the year 1818 in Oberndorf, Austria, there was a priest named Joseph Mohr who was going up to his church to have the Christmas Eve service. And the story goes that he gets to the church and he's met at the door by his organist, Franz Gruber. And according to the story, Franz Gruber is in a panic. The organ has broken. He has no parts to replace the broken parts, and these are supposed to be leather straps that move the bellows. And he's panicked. And he says to the priest, Joseph Mohr, he says, "What are we going to do? The whole town's coming up for Christmas Eve service tonight, and we have no music." Joseph Mohr calmly says, "You were working on a song a couple of weeks ago. Did you finish it?" And he said, "Well, no." He says, "Tell you what, I have my guitar with me. You have your guitar here. Let's finish the song this afternoon, and we'll have music to play for tonight's service." The town comes up. They play the song Stille Nacht. And they say at this point that after that, Joseph Mohr and Franz Gruber wipe their foreheads and say, "Phew, dodged a bullet."
Yeah.
And we had music, and then never sang the song again in the church. And that song would be carried down the mountainside by the congregation because very often with new hymns or new songs, they were repeated to the point where most people had it memorized by the time they left church.
Oh, okay.
And so this is how it would be carried down through the community, and then it would spread around the world and become one of the most translated hymns of all history, second only to Amazing Grace. But the truth, I think, is actually more interesting than that wonderful story. For it turns out that Joseph Mohr had written the poem Stille Nacht 2 years earlier in 1816, and he loved guitar music. And he didn't actually go up to the church that night and find Franz Gruber panicked at the door. He actually went to Franz Gruber's house in the afternoon and said, "I would like to finish this song. Can you help me finish this song? And I want to sing it tonight." There's no indication that the organ was broken at this point, although it could have been. We don't know for sure. What we do know is that Franz Gruber wrote about the visit from Joseph Mohr, and they sat down together and finished the first version of Stille Nacht, which they then played and sang that night. And there's no record of the congregation taking and doing anything more with it. However, there is an organ repairman who over the next couple of years, visiting the church, supposedly procured a copy of Stille Nacht, the second version, and took it home with him, and the historians write, and then it started spreading around the world, and I see no evidence that that actually was how it happened. I think it was a combination of the congregation falling in love with it, and eventually, because they did sing it more often after that point. Franz Gruber himself actually wrote several more versions, orchestral versions, and the manuscripts are there to prove it. Interestingly enough, it wasn't until 1995 that anybody believed that the Franz Gruber had anything to do with it. They thought it was either Bach, Mozart, or Beethoven who had written the melody, and I couldn't tell you where their time frames run across with this, but they just verified a manuscript in Gruber's own writing in 1995 that finally puts the proof in the fact that it was he and Joseph Mohr who wrote Stille Nacht. So I'm going to sing a little of it in the way that it was meant to be sung, which is with guitar. So if you're sitting at home and you have your guitar and you want to play along, I'm going to be singing it in the key of G, at least to start out. I'm going to sing the first verse in German, and then I'll sing the first verse in English as well. If you sing along now, you'll be singing it the way it was originally intended to be sung, which is with guitar. And you sing it in church. Most people will do it with organ during the candle lighting, candle ceremony at the end of the night at the midnight services.
Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, alle schläft, einsam wacht, nur das traute hochheilige Paar. Holter Knabe im lochigen Haar, schlaf in Himmel heavenly peace. Sleep in heavenly peace.
Still enough.
It's a beautiful song. It's just, you never get tired of it.
No, you don't. And the more you know about the men who wrote it and the story behind it, the more there is to it.
Yeah.
At least for me, I know that that's one of the reasons I do what I do, is because we sing so many songs often and don't know what they're about and take for granted the words that are there, and they all take on a whole different meaning.
Well, that's what fascinated me about the first show I saw you at, and why I wanted to get you here in the studio.
Well, thank you.
Jingle Bells. Talk about lightening things up a little bit.
Yeah, now Jingle Bells was originally written as a Thanksgiving song, but we now associate it with Christmas because of one element in the song, and this is where Dennis is going to help me out again. The bells themselves were put on sleigh for a reason. For those of you who celebrate Christmas and the aspect of Santa Claus, what is the sound that you wait to hear that tells you that Santa's around?
Jingle Bells.
The sleigh bells.
Yeah.
And the reason that they're there is because if you didn't have those bells, you wouldn't hear him coming. But that aspect of that sound has a real deep reason for being there. In fact, it's a safety reason.
It has saved my life a couple times.
And you know what we're about to talk about. If you have ever been in a horse-drawn sleigh in the wintertime, when it's moving across the snow-covered ground, there is no sound. It's hardly audible at all, except for, depending on what kind of horseshoes your horse has, the sound of the horse's hooves in the snow is barely heard too. Now, in the wintertime, these sleighs are not just rolling along comfortably like we do today. We have this evening ride through a town or something like that for a little relaxation. These people were cold.
Yeah.
They wanted to get home, and so they ran these sleighs fast. And if you were coming around a blind corner in the woods, let's say, you could crash right into another sleigh, never seeing them or hearing them come, unless those bells were on the sleigh. They were attached to the horse usually, and the rhythm of the bells, because every single bell had its own pitch, own sound, your horse had a rhythm when it moved, and your bells moved with that rhythm, and you could hear the bells of another horse coming because they didn't match your horses. That's how you could tell. And then you slowed down because you knew that they were on their way. And this is what the song Jingle Bells is all about. It's about this young man who takes a young lady out in the sleigh for a ride, and he gets a little too rambunctious with the speed of the sleigh, and they ended up in a drifted bank, as the song says, because the horse was lean and lank, which means it didn't have a lot of weight, and when it went too fast around the corner, the sleigh pulled the horse off the path and they got tangled up. And then you'll hear in the last verse, he tells you what you should do. And so with Jingle Bells, Dennis is going to ring the bells during the Jingle Bell chorus part. And he's going to do his best to ring them in the rhythm of the song, because that will imitate the rhythm of the horse. You do the best you can.
Yeah, as always, I will do the best I can.
Now, I'm assuming you folks at home know this song, and there are some endings at the end of the line that Dennis may or may not know, so you're going to have to help him with this. Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Oh no, no bells, not yet. That is the ha 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 part. Now if you folks at home don't know that, at the end of that line you're supposed to laugh 3 times. Ha ha ha. And then you're supposed to do the hey part right before we get to the chorus. So let's try that again.
Okay.
Pressure's off, you don't have to do it. Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Ha ha ha, bells on bobtails ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight. Oh, jingle bells, jingle jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. A day or two ago, I thought I'd take a ride, and soon Miss Fanny Bright was seated by my side. The horse was lean and lank, misfortune seemed his lot. He got into a drifted bank, and then we got upsot. Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. A day or two ago, the story I must tell. I went out on the snow, and on my back I fell. A gent was riding by in a one-horse open sleigh. He laughed as there I sprawling lie, and quickly drove away. Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Now the ground is white, go it while you're young. Take the girls tonight and sing this sleighing song. Just get a bobtailed bay, 240 as his speed. Hitch him to an open sleigh, and crack, you'll take the lead. Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Well, thank you, Dennis, for doing that.
Oh, thank you.
And again, yeah, you can hang them right there for now.
Okay.
These songs have these terms in that back in those days, everybody knew what some of these things meant.
Yeah.
But a bobtailed bay, for those of you who don't know, a bay is a kind of a horse, a workhorse, usually a farm horse, and they would put the sleigh bells on the bay. And they want you to have a bay, and they make a point of this because the horse that got them into trouble was lean and lank. A bay is a good, big, strong horse that will keep you on path. But it's a bobtail bay, and a lot of people don't know what that is. A horse's tail hangs down behind them and can get caught in the reins and pulled, and if that happens, it hurts the horse, and they will bolt or pitch sideways. And so to avoid that, they would tie the horse's tail up into what looks like a lady's bun or a knot or a bob, and that's a bobtailed bay. And then it says, get a bobtailed bay and keep him at 240 speed. That means that that horse would be traveling, covering a mile in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, which is a standard trot that is faster than walking, but not as fast as full-out galloping. So a 240 speed is a nice, even plot along the same rhythm that we were doing in the song, which is why those bells moving at the same rhythm would mean that the horse was moving like that as well. So that's a little bit about Jingle Bells.
Yeah, I did not know that. We are almost out of time, but can we quickly work in one last song?
Sure.
We Wish You a Merry Christmas.
Yes, We Wish You a Merry Christmas is a wonderful one to close on. It was a typical caroler's song. And the carolers would come and sing this last because after they had done several songs, they were waiting to be fed. It was cold, and they wanted something warm to drink and warm to eat. And so this song, We Wish You a Merry Christmas, has this wonderful message to it, but if you listen to the verses, they tell the real story of what's going on. We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Glad tidings to you wherever you are, glad tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. Now they start to get a little demanding because the food hasn't shown up yet. Oh, bring us some figgy pudding, oh, bring us some figgy pudding, oh, bring us some figgy pudding and a cup of good cheer. Glad tidings to you wherever you are, glad tidings for Christmas and a Happy New Year. get downright militant about it. And we won't go until we get some, we won't go until we get some, we won't go until we get some, so bring some out here. We wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Merry Christmas, everyone.
I'm Dennis Miller, and that's the end of this episode, our Christmas-themed conversations with Roy Justice. We'll do it again.